Year of the Governor's Broadband Task Force. My name is Chris Meyer. I am not Brittany Beyer. I see Brittany smiling though. Brittany has been our chair for the last 2 years, and so I do want to say one more time, thank you, Brittany, for all the work you've done over the last 2 years. And I very much look forward to stepping into some very big and energetic shoes, and we'll see how this goes. I want to thank everybody who's been able to join us today. This is important work, and if you've read through the past reports of the Governor's Broadband Task Force, we've made amazing strides in the last 2 years, but we also know there's a long way to go yet. And that's why the work of this committee continues for a third year. Today, we're going to have two presentations, one from Chairperson Volk at the Public Service Commission, as well as a presentation from the State Broadband Office. After that, we're going to jump right into the meat of what we're here to do, and that's start to talk about the priorities we want to set for our group for the next 12 months of work that we're looking at. With that, I'll be brief and turn this back over to Jaron, who will handle some of the housekeeping items, the introductions, and public comments. Jaron.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Good to see everyone. And as Chris mentioned, thank you all for attending. Today, of course, is a convening of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, and today is September 21st, 2022. Just want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting and it is being recorded. We do have a meeting agenda available on the Public Service Commission events calendar. And also, I know we all know this at this point, but if you can remain on mute when you're not talking, and then any members of the public, if you could kind of be mindful of your audio. And we do have a public comment period that'll be coming up very shortly. And since we have an introductions agenda item, I'm going to forego a roll call for now and cover that then. And why don't we go ahead and move into public comment. So now is the time we'll ask for public comment. Members of the public can unmute and make a public comment. I would just ask that pertain to the subject of broadband access and remain relatively brief. You can also use the chat function if you'd like to as well. I will ask for public comment now. And I'm going to make a second call for any public comment. And a last call for any public comment today. Hearing none, I will also make a note that we do accept written public comment kind of on an ongoing basis, and we have directions on how to do so on our task force webpage, along with other good information like meeting dates, agendas, recordings, updates, etc. So why don't we go ahead and actually move into introductions, which I'm actually quite excited to do. We've got a few new members with us this year, and in an effort to kind of bring everyone up to speed, I'm going to ask that when I call your name, if you could just let us know a little bit about you, your name, your organization, or who you're representing, maybe a little bit about your broadband experience, et cetera, that sort of thing. So Chris, I know you were just talking, but why don't you start us off? Chris Meyer, I should say. Sorry, we have two Chris's.
Yeah, thank you, Jaron. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been on the task force the last 2 years. My name is Chris Meyer. I'm the Director of Telehealth and Virtual Care for Marshfield Clinic Health System, and I live up here in central Wisconsin in Marshfield. One of the components that I do in my role at Marshfield Clinic is work with many of the very rural small communities that we serve to help them with their broadband expansion. Obviously, the pandemic brought about a new realization about the value of telehealth, something we've been working with for over 25 years at Marshfield Clinic. But obviously getting better broadband service for our patients so that we can do more of their care in their home and where it's more convenient for them is critical. And so that is how I got connected with the Public Service Commission and the broadband expansion efforts in the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Chris. Next, we'll move to Biko Baker. Biko, are you with us today? I'm not seeing you in the agenda, or excuse me, the participants. Maybe we'll pass on him for now and return. Marta Bechdahl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, mouse trouble. Hi, I'm Marta Bechdahl. I'm the Executive Director of the Educational Communications Board, and we're an independent state agency that focuses on delivering public broadcasting throughout the state. So you would know us as PBS Wisconsin, Wisconsin Public Radio. And beginning in 2023, we will also be the master control for Milwaukee PBS. So part of our mission is to create and secure, maintain the networks that distribute this content throughout the state. And our board has charged us with assisting in broadband development wherever possible.
Thank you, Marta. Brittany Byer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brittany Byer. I recently transitioned to a consulting position with Health Tech Solutions. Celerity is their project management arm, and they're doing broadband work with community planning on the local, regional, and state level. So that is my current position. As Chris mentioned, I was the chair of the governor's task force on broadband for the past 2 years, looking at the problem from a regional economic development side of things.
Thanks, Brittany. Sal Carranza, who I believe sent me a note that he wasn't going to be able to make it today. So why don't we move along? Shannon Clark. Shannon, are you with us today? I'm not seeing you in the participant list. Why don't we move along? Lori Collins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Collins. I am the founder and CEO of SonicNet. We are an ISP based out of Eagle River, so we serve the very upper level of Wisconsin. We are both a fixed wireless and now a fiber provider. And we've been in business for 15 years. So I feel like I'm representing the smaller ISPs on this task force, and happy and proud to do so. And thank you all for another year. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Lori. Doug Cox. Doug, are you with us today?
As long as we can get something.
Why don't we return to Doug? And we've got a new member, Angie Dickinson. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Happy to. Thank you, Jaron. I'm Angie Dickinson. I am with TDS Telecom. I know a number of you, and I'm happy to see so many familiar faces from my time working in the broadband office at the PSC. Commissioner Bach, great to see all of you. I left the PSC. I moved to lead the state broadband office in Minnesota, and in May joined the team at TDS after Gene Pock retired. So I'm thrilled to be working with all of you again, and looking forward to our work together.
Thank you, Angie. Emily Dittmar.
Hello, I'm Emily Dittmar, the Library and Media Specialist at Muskego High School, and I'm also the Legislative Chair for WEMTA, which is the Wisconsin Educational Media and Technology Association. So we are a K-12 organization of librarians and tech professionals. And at my school in particular, I'm the one who's in charge of getting everyone connected if they don't have connectivity at home. So that on the grounds K-12 perspective is what I hope to represent.
Thank you, Emily. Why don't we move to Celeste Flynn? Celeste, are you with us today? I'm not seeing you in the participants, so why don't we move along? Chris Herjong. Chris, are you with us today? I believe I also don't see you in the participants. Justin Hebner.
Hey everybody, I'm the one walking on a treadmill here, but hopefully I don't make anyone seasick. I work at Solaris. We're in the central part of Wisconsin. We're mostly fiber-based ISP, so we're about 80% fiber, about 16,000 to 17,000 subscribers. And I think last year was my first year on the committee, so this will be my second year. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Gail Hike.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Hike. I work with the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Division of Extension. I'm the statewide community development broadband specialist with Extension. I'm actually work out of northern Wisconsin in Phillips, although I travel across the entire state, working a lot with community broadband planning. I also do some work with digital literacy and digital inclusion. So great to be back.
Thank you so much, Gail. Barbara Koldos, who is a new member as well. Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Barbara Koldos, grateful to be here. I'm with New North, the 18-county economic development organization for Northeast Wisconsin. First time on this task force, so thank you for the opportunity to be here. Honestly, did not know anything much about broadband except for how to turn my computer on and made sure that it was on and working. And if it didn't work, I would unplug my router and plug it back in. But my role here at New North was to be the project manager for our broadband study, access study, and plans for our 18-county region. So thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate you being here as well. State Senator Markline, or if we've got anyone from his office. All right, Jose Martinez. Jose, are you with us? All right. State Representative Beth Myers, or anyone possibly from her office.
Hi, my name's Leah. I'm from Rep Myers' office. She is currently driving up to the district right now. She's on the call, but she's just not able to turn her speaker on and off right now since she's driving. But I am on the call as well. So if you have any questions, you can redirect them to me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. State Representative Mursaw.
Good afternoon, everybody. Represent the 36th Assembly District up here in northeastern Wisconsin, which I have a lot of folks call me, on a regular basis, wondering about their internet and when they're going to get better service. So just always trying to try to better ourselves on how we get those services to them. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here as well. State Senator Paff. Not hearing anything. Rachel Shemlin.
Hi, Jaren. I'm really happy to be here. This is a really dynamic group, and I'm excited to be collaborating with all of you. If we haven't had the chance to meet before, my name is Rachel Shemlin, and I'm an education consultant in the Division of Libraries and Technology at the Department of Public Instruction in Wisconsin. And in that role, I assist schools with broadband connectivity. I also help them maximize their federal E-rate funding, which discounts the cost of bringing internet to the school building, as well as the cost of building out the infrastructure to the classrooms and get internet into the classrooms for learning. And then supporting schools in connecting students to the internet where they live, as well as supporting schools with working in their local communities on broadband expansion efforts. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And we've got another new member joining us today, Michelle Schuler. Would you like to introduce yourself? And if I pronounce your name wrong, please do let me know.
You're good. Thanks, Jaren. Michelle Schuler, Microsoft. I have a big company behind me. So as part of this team, how do we leverage some of the information and some of the knowledge that we have as Microsoft? Focus really on digital equity and the digital divide, working very closely with the New North. My territory is specifically Brown and Outagamie counties, and deep diving here. But as we work with the New North on digital literacy programs, skilling for jobs, and upskilling of employees, we're really focused on, what does that mean for broadband and devices and job opportunities.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us. Brett Shupner.
Good afternoon. I'm Brett Shupner. I'm the General Manager, Reedsburg Utility Commission. Reedsburg Utility is the municipally owned electric and water provider for the city of Reedsburg. We've been in existence for 128 years. And about 30 years ago, we started our own fiber optic utility and to serve the city of Reedsburg, and have been continually growing that. since then, we serve parts of a good portion of Sauk County, plus are expanding into Richland, Iowa, Juneau counties also. And I think just one comment I noticed, some of the other providers, Justin and Chad, we got very similar hairlines. I don't know what if there's a coincidence there or not, but anyway.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction, Brett. Jennifer Schilling.
Good afternoon. I don't know if my camera's working. I'm actually in transit to the cities for a meeting, but I'm Jennifer Schilling from Dairyland Power Cooperative located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm the government relations manager there. I've been here 2 years, but prior to that, I served in the legislature for 20 years, representing La Crosse and Western Wisconsin, both in the Assembly and the Senate. So it's good to see some familiar faces on here, and welcome Angie. I've worked with her before in my previous life, so I'm glad to have you on the committee as well. And we are in the midst of a significant broadband application for middle mile to the NTIA this week and next week. And so a little harried here, but certainly in the co-op that I work for, the middle mile space is where we are interested in. So nice to meet everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. Chet Streeb. I believe Chet had sent me a note that he was going to miss today. Chad Young.
Good afternoon, everyone. And yeah, I think you're onto something there, Brett. I'm Chad Young. I'm the CEO for Norvato, also known as Chequamegon Communications Cooperative. We're based in Cable, Wisconsin, and we serve the northwestern corner of the state with an almost all fiber network. And we talk and hear from many of the areas around us about the continued need for broadband and how to get that deployed to them. So happy to be a returning member of the task force, and great to see many faces I've seen before, as well as some of the new ones.
Thank you very much, Chad. I have reached the bottom of my list. Did I miss anyone, or did anyone join us kind of in progress? If no, it would be a great time to let us know. I didn't see anyone in the waiting room, so I thought the answer would be a no. I wanted to take a moment to introduce some of the PSC staff, and as well Kristen from Extensions. Kristen did a absolutely wonderful job last year helping facilitate this group, and has graciously agreed to assist again this year. And we're very thankful for her to be joining us. Kristen, would you mind doing a brief introduction?
I don't mind at all. And thank you very much, Jared. It was a joy to work with the group last year. The quality of conversation and the ideas and the information that you all possess was wonderful as a facilitator to be able to work with a high-level group of folks that are interested in broadband across the state. I'm a community economic development specialist with the Division of Extension. I work out of the Madison office, but I work across the state. Like Gail, I do a lot of traveling and I'm on the road quite a bit. My background is in communication research. And so outside of my interest in broadband and broadband deployment, my interest research-wise is in how individuals are accessing communication through the internet and using media to understand the world that we live in. So very excited to be here and working again with this group.
Thank you, Kristen. Alyssa Kenny from PSC, would you like to introduce yourself?
In the office, and for those who aren't coming in often, send a photo.
Hi, everybody.
Might also
Alyssa Kenny
work
here, I'm
really
the State Broadband and
Is
Digital
that
Equity
okay?
Director, and I lead the bureau that overhas the broadband office on it. Thank you for being here.
And Rory Tukalski, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Rory Tukalski here. I'm manager of the Wisconsin Broadband Office within Alyssa's bureau. I'm really focused on day-to-day operations of the office, managing grants, doing some planning and outreach and mapping efforts. So kind of the more internal side of things. Nice to meet all of you, and thanks for all coming together and talking about this important issue. It's a pleasure to be part of this group.
Thank you, Rory. I appreciate that. And as folks likely know, I'm Jaron. I'm the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator in the Wisconsin Broadband Office. I've been with the PSC since 2015, kind of in various broadband-focused roles. Yeah, if any questions arise throughout this process, please do feel free to reach out to me or any of the members of the PSC. We'd be happy to help you or direct your questions to someone who might be able to help you as well. Actually, I failed to forget, or I forgot Christy. Christy Nieto, would you like to introduce yourself? I apologize about that.
No problem at all, Jaron. I'm Christy Nieto. I'm the Division Administrator at the Commission for our Division of Digital Access, Consumer and Environmental Affairs, which is the division that includes the Broadband Office. And it's great to work with all of you, as always.
Thank you, Christy, and my apologies. Chris, I will turn it back over to you to kind of move us through the next couple of agenda items. So I'll kick it back to you.
All right, thank you, Jaron. And thank you everyone for those introductions. It's always good to see friendly faces again, even those that haven't been here before. You look friendly, so I'm excited to work with you. The next two items on our agenda are presentations, and this month we're fortunate again to have with us Public Service Commission Chairperson Rebecca Cameron Bulk to give us some words of wisdom and encouragement as we embark on the third year here of the Governor's Broadband Task Force. Chairperson.
Whew, Chris, I don't know about words of wisdom. Certainly my children would not agree that I am capable of dispensing any of that. But thank you. And I think it's really nice to see everybody. And on behalf of myself and the governor, I'd again like to welcome you, Chris, in your new role for serving as chair of the task force. And then I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to the new task members. In particular, Angie Dickinson, it's very nice to see you again. Wonderful to have you back in this capacity. As Angie said in her intro, she's a PSC alum. And truth be told, I learned so much from Angie before we lost her to the state of Minnesota. So it's really nice to have you back, and thank you for lending your time and your talents. Also, Michelle Schuler from Microsoft, I really appreciate the fact that while you have such a large company backing you, that you have a very, very precise focus, and you're going to be able to give us a lot of really great insight. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And then Steve Schneider, I think maybe, Jaron, we missed him in the intro, but Steve Schneider, who's the CEO of Bug Tussle, he is a new member. And so I'd like to maybe just take a couple of seconds and allow Steve to introduce himself to the group. And again, a big welcome to you, Steve.
Thanks. I'm not formally appointed yet, I don't think. So I think I'm a member of the public today, but I'm the president CEO of Bug Tussle Wireless, and we are working in about 36 different counties in the state to bring both middle mile, last mile, fixed broadband and educational solutions on broadband out there. So very excited to hopefully be a part of the task force. Thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to help out, Steve, and we'll get you official as soon as possible. I'd also like to thank all of you returning task force members for your continued service. I know that each one of you has a day job, a very important day job, and your contributions and your engagement with the task force is incredibly appreciated, and the input that you provide is taken very seriously. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't once again thank Kristen Runge for sticking on as facilitator. As Jaron mentioned, you did a fantastic job in making sure that we stay on track and that we're doing all of the things that this task force was charged with doing. I'd also like to acknowledge the PSC staff members. Our broadband grant program is just the epitome of an efficient and effective grant program with robust internal controls and such a high standard of integrity. And that's because of the members who make up our state broadband office. I think everybody on the task force has probably heard, and if you haven't, then I'm happy to repeat it multiple times. We were recently recognized by the NTIA as best in class for our grant program, specifically as it relates to the clear documentation of our application and award processes. So that is a recognition, and it is a validation of all of the really hard work that our state broadband office does every single day. And here we are. Yes, it's the third year. And while I think all of us can see that there is a finish line in sight, I would argue that the work that we have in front of us this upcoming year is probably going to be some of the most difficult work. A lot of the low-hanging fruit, as it were, has already been addressed, and that leaves a lot of the harder to reach areas in our state. And so I would challenge all of you to really think about what we want to get out of this year's work. Yes, we've had a lot of success. Nearly 390,000 locations have been served. More than $300 million has been awarded in terms of the grants, but we understand that it's more than just doling out grants. We have to address affordability. We have to address adoption needs and shortcomings. And we also have to really, really dial in on where the service is still needed, because that will help us ensure that we're making the most out of the dollars that we have at our disposal. We know that the bipartisan infrastructure law and its funding is going to allow us to make a significant dent in those 3 A's, affordability, adoption, and access. But we know that it's going to take a lot of precision, and we have to be very deliberate about the way that we go about using those dollars. So Jaron mentioned at the top that you all will be having a brainstorming session today to talk about what the focus should be for the next report. And I would just add a couple of suggestions for your consideration. I think for me, it would be incredibly helpful if you spent some time looking at the planning and coordination of the federal funds coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. It would really help me, and I think our broadband office would appreciate it as well, if the task force could take a deeper dive into affordability. And going hand in hand with that is how do we start to encourage competition in the rural areas so that we can see a downward pressure on rates, because we know that we have to keep affordability front and center. And then I would also be interested to hear from the task force in terms of what are additional ways besides grants. I've said since I've been at the commission that we can't just depend on doling out grant dollars. It has to be a multifaceted approach. And I would argue that because we're getting to the harder to reach areas in our state, that need to use a multifaceted approach is only going to be magnified. So I would challenge this task force to really have tough conversations about what are additional ways besides grants that can incentivize the build out of broadband infrastructure in Wisconsin's hardest to reach areas. And then finally, I would put for your consideration, are there additional ways to increase adoption of broadband? So we know that it's not just enough to have access to the infrastructure. We have to make sure that the end user understands how to use the infrastructure in order for them to live a fully connected life in today's society. So your work and the recommendations are such a critical component of getting us to connect each and every citizen within the state. And again, I appreciate the time and the engagement that you take. Justin, your ability to multitask is just incredible. So I have no doubt that this task force will be able to help us with the harder to solve issues when we're talking about getting down to connecting the last of our friends and neighbors who still require access. So thank you. I am always available and willing to have those tough conversations. So please feel free to contact me. And I now leave you in good hands with Chris. So thank you for having me. Good luck, and I look forward to the progress in this upcoming year.
Thank you, Chairperson Volk. And I noticed, Angie, you had your hand up while Chairperson Volk was speaking. Did you have a question?
Oh, it might have been user error. I was trying to give applause to the broadband office for their national recognition. So
that was, yeah, I didn't know that. So that was news to me, and that's awesome. And I would agree. So thank you again, Chairperson Volk. Moving on in our agenda, the next item is a presentation from the Wisconsin Broadband Office. Jaren, is that you? I'm sorry, I don't know who to toss it to.
It'll be Alyssa and Rory, and I will be running the slides.
All right. Alyssa, do you want to kick us off, or Rory?
Yeah, I'll take over from here. Jaren, you want to pull up those slides for me? Jaren has the unique task and expertise of coordinating our whole meeting, getting slides moving, and it's all seamless. So we're thankful to him as well. Thanks, Jaren. So, I mean, Becky has already done a lot of bragging on our behalf, and certainly there's lots of work that's being done here, but I think we're going to do this presentation, and the goal is just get everybody on the same page, what we've been up to, what we're focusing on, and especially we want to talk about some of the mapping issues that are coming up recently, as well as these big federal funding pots of money that we're going to spend a lot of time working on in the next couple months. So just want to make sure all the members are understanding of all those different complicated pieces. And, you know, it's kind of a way to kick off a lot of our discussion later today in brainstorming to help give some context. So Jaren, you want to go to our next slide, please? Yeah, I see a question in the chat. We can absolutely pass these slides around after the meeting as well. Jaren, I am not seeing slides. I'm just seeing the initial presentation page.
Okay. Just give me a minute. I thought I had advanced those slides. Stop and reshare this.
I'll just start by saying, you know, everyone here has already heard this a million times, but I think it's worth saying every time I present. You know, our mission here in the broadband office is to make high-speed internet available and accessible and affordable for all Wisconsinites. So, you know, I can say it a million times, but that means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. So like Becky said, affordability, accessibility, and adoption are all important components to that. So, you know, making sure folks have an opportunity to equitably share and participate in our digital economy and our, you know, our digital society. So with that, looks like we got slides here now. Great. Thank you, Jaren. Want to pop us two forward here?
It's me sharing as the backup. So just give me 1 second.
There we go. So, you know, Becky already bragged a little bit, but I just want to point out, you know, we've been up to a lot these last couple of years, and there's lots of things that we are proud to show off. And I think one recent tool, if you've subscribed to our newsletter, we put out some announcements about the broadband grant footprint. It's a new tool we just put out. It's this screenshot on the right here. You can access the broadband grant footprint on our website and click into that and zoom in and look around. This is a map of all the grants we've awarded over our 8 or 9 years of grant making. So a cool way to visualize it, and you can type in addresses and see what's been going on, and if there's funding in your area, in your legislative district, in your county. And, you know, lots and lots of money has been spent, and even more is coming. So we like to use this tool as a way to share and show what we've been up to. Can you next slide for me? So another way to look at this about what we've been up to and progress. This was a highlight from our task force report we put out this past June. This is a map on the left and the right of improving broadband service in Wisconsin. So on the left is that 25/3 speed standard. All of the light blue areas are areas in Wisconsin that we know, as best our data is right now, that has that 25/3 service. And the navy blue, that darker blue, is areas that between 2020 and 2021 got new 25/3 service. So, you know, lots of areas are already filling in, and we like to see that improvement year over year. And on the right is kind of a similar graphic, but at a higher speed standard, that kind of that 100/20 speed standard. And the dark purple is all those new areas. So if you look at this, you can really see some of our grant projects and a lot of our, you know, private investment and development going on month by month here in Wisconsin. So a fun way to see what we've been up to and kind of the successes we've had so far. Next slide, please. So looking forward, there's a lot of things on the horizon for the broadband office, you know, in Wisconsin and nationwide. And I'm sure you've heard the buzz. There's lots of federal funding coming. You know, first and foremost, though, the funding is only good if we can figure out where to place it. And the Federal Communications Commission, along with state partners, has spent a lot of time in the last couple of years trying to upgrade our data. You know, it's no longer sufficient to say a neighborhood is served or not. based on, one house in a neighborhood having access to service. We want, a house by house, a business by business, a building by building measurement of broadband availability. So we have some tools in our toolkit here in the broadband office that we've been using to show availability and grant making. Our Wisconsin broadband map is always getting better. That's that screenshot on the top right, and we'll hope to make that even better in the coming months once we get some more data from the FCC and our provider partners. But we also do have a survey tool, the Wisconsin Internet Self-Report. This is something we've been spinning up and sharing around lately. The goal of the survey tool is to collect user experiences. Constituents, general members of the public will fill out that survey tool that aggregates data for us. We can get a speed test from them and see a point on the map of what that actually looks like in their neighborhood, in their home. So talking about data and maps, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the FCC mapping process. That's the Federal Communications Commission. The real focus of that mapping process is transitioning us from that very that kind of slightly more generalized neighborhood by neighborhood or city block by city block to the very specific building by building measurement of broadband. And the idea there is there's gaps all over our state, and just because some areas of a neighborhood have internet access doesn't mean all of them do. And so we want to have a better measurement of where that need is so that we can do a better job of allocating grants and finding and filling those gaps. So starting in November, the FCC has promised they're going to be publishing kind of the first edition of the new broadband map. It'll be that most granular data. It will be house by house, premises by premises. And as a component of that map, we're going to be able to look anywhere in Wisconsin, pull up a map and click on, an address, a point on the map that's a building or a business, and see, does it have broadband service? Does it not? And what quality of advertised speed is available at that service point? So, building that map is a very big and complex thing. It sounds easy to describe, but there's lots of challenges in terms of aggregating an entire nation, let alone an entire state and an entire nation of maps of all these little location points. So FCC has been working very hard on this, and this fall, the broadband office and some of our partners are going to be involved in a process where FCC will publish this new map with kind of some initial estimates and an initial, example of what they think the best data we have is for any given location right now. And the broadband office, along with its partners, will go through this two-tiered challenge process. And what we'll do is first, we need to look at the map itself, kind of the canvas that we're painting on top of, and make sure that the map is good. So that's making sure, we call it the fabric, the locations fabric, making sure that we have all the points on that map and we know where we need to paint in that broadband service. So in the next couple of weeks, in the next month or two, our office is going to work with FCC. We're going to look at the data that they've prepared and make a decision about whether or not we agree with it. And in the likely case that we have some disagreements here and there, we're going to submit more data and we'll do a challenge to that fabric. So we'll be making sure that, we're labeling, residential locations correctly, that, a business is a business. We'll be making sure that, we put the point of the address on top of your house rather than in your back 40 lot, all these different components to making sure that we put the right place so that we know where to paint in that broadband service in our next step. And that next step is the availability challenge. So once we have a good map, we need to start filling it in and painting in where all that broadband service is. And that's the second step of this process that will be coming hopefully by the end of the year, maybe early next year, is availability. And once we have a good map, we're going to look at the data that internet service providers have submitted to FCC and FCC has aggregated nationwide, and look at that data and say, does it look good? Does what we have in the map that FCC has published match the reality on the ground? It's a painfully complex question, and there's lots of different ways that things can go wrong, from the step of providing service and a service provider reporting that to FCC, and then it getting all the way back to this map. So we want to look at that and ask the question, is service available at any given point on that map? And availability in terms of how FCC is thinking about it and spending a lot of focus in their first iteration of the map is talking about on any given day, if you called up your internet service provider and said, hi, I'd like to subscribe to your internet service, can they, within 10 days through a standard installation, provide you that service? They don't need to do any extraordinary construction, there's no delays or, difficulties in providing that service. So, what we think of as kind of a typical, hopefully, experience when you call and ask for service from your internet service provider. So if there's a case where the provider says on the map that, yep, you have service from us, we'll be able to provide you service, but you're not able to get that standard installation, that's a case where there's a disagreement between what's on the ground or what's going on and what's reported in the map. And we want to make sure we can aggregate those experiences and capture those disagreements so that we can have a better map and we know where we might need a little bit more funding to help a provider build out to an area and make that last connection to the house or the business or whatever location. So in this first round, when we're talking about availability, there's a lot of focus on that physical connection to the premises. There's also a component that FCC is still chewing on a little bit. They're interested in hearing about the quality of service as well, although it won't be a core decision-making for determining availability to location. So, we'll also, as part of our challenge process, be making sure that we can aggregate user experiences through the Wisconsin Internet Survey tool or through GeoPartners speed test tools that you all might be familiar with, aggregating those speed test data sets, and we can submit those to FCC as kind of supplementary information, but it won't be kind of the primary focus going forward. So when we talk about all of these maps and getting good data, it all comes back down to we need maps because we want to allocate funding. So I'll talk now about some of our funding sources coming up, but I think first and foremost, I would say it's important to have good maps because we need to know where we need to allocate the money. And in the past, it's been challenging to do that. So going forward, a lot of the federal funding that we're seeing is going to be tied to those maps and allocated based on those maps. So it's important to us that the broadband office and our partners spend time challenging and analyzing and making sure that the map is as good as it can be. So on the screen here is a slide of a million different funding sources. Lots of times they're very confusing and there's different rules and requirements for all of them. But our state expansion grant program has been very successful for many years. That's been a big component of our broadband funding. We also have had some coronavirus related stimulus funds through the CARES and ARPA laws. Those have both been successful programs. Coming up, we're facing down even more federal funding that we're going to help administer. The states will be responsible for administering funding from the Capital Projects Fund, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then on top of all that, we've heard a lot of buzz and seen a lot of energy from local, federal, and other, private investment from providers and other partners. So there's lots of funding in the mix here, but I think the biggest one we want to talk about today is the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's a huge pile of money, and Wisconsin is going to hopefully get a big chunk of that so that we can build out infrastructure and spend more time talking about equity and adoption and making sure that folks who have had a little bit harder time getting connected can get involved and get connected. So I'll talk to you first about BEAD, and then I'll hand it over to Alyssa, and she'll talk about digital equity and kind of the, more inclusion and planning purposes over there. So BEAD in particular is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. That's the big ticket infrastructure focused program of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's going to be focused on targeting areas in Wisconsin that lack access to 25/3. So on that map we showed before, anywhere where it was white, it wasn't filled in, those will be that first and primary focus. And if we have additional money left over, once we can target all those areas, we'll work our way into areas that lack 100/20. The goal in the BEAD program, once funding is allocated, is we're going to be allocating money to build broadband infrastructure that's physical connections to homes and businesses that meets a 100/20 speed standard. So whereas traditionally 25/3 has been a big focus for allocating funding, 25/3 is kind of a speed standard where, one person can watch Netflix or one person can be on a video call reliably at any given time in a household. The 100/20 is starting to get up to a speed where you can have a whole household involved in, high use internet connectivity That can be something like, video calls, two parents on video calls working from home while a kid is doing their educational resources through a virtual schooling. So, a higher speed standard, a little bit higher use activity. Like I said before, the FCC maps are going to be a really big component of the BEAD program, because that's going to determine how much money we get in Wisconsin. So once the FCC map goes through an initial challenge process, we're going to get an allocation from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, that's NTIA, and they're going to give hopefully about $1 billion to Wisconsin to make a lot of these infrastructure investments. That $1 billion is an estimate. The idea is Wisconsin will get its proportional share of all of the houses and businesses nationwide that lack access to broadband. Based on the data we've seen so far, it could be about $1 billion. So a huge pile of money in investment. But first, in order to use that money, we need to do some planning. So as you see on this timeline here, there's kind of a planning period that we've just started embarking on in the past month or two. We started, and where we are right now is we've submitted an application to NTIA for a $5 million allocation of planning funds. So over the next 9 months or so, once we get our application approved, which we hope is going to be very soon, we will start a planning process where we will work with providers, we will work with regional and county and local units of government, all different players in the broadband sphere, to have conversations, to collect more data, to do surveys, provide technical assistance, empower local communities to do planning themselves, and have conversations about what their community need is. We're going to allocate $5 million to this. And at the end of that 9-month planning period, we will prepare what we will call the 5-year plan for broadband. And that 5-year plan is going to drive our allocation of that hopefully $1 billion of infrastructure investment. So on the slide here, you see there's just a million different components of the ways we're going to spend our BEAD planning money. We're certainly going to be hiring a couple new staff in our office to help provide technical assistance, local coordination, do some outreach, host events, do more mapping and data analysis. We're going to be doing lots of communication and outreach, hosting events. So stay tuned. We hope to have lots of events in your region of the state. And also spending time working with local elected leaders, local champions, to empower them to get involved in the broadband development sphere and have conversations in their community, and work with providers to develop applications and build projects in their community that can be successful and win grant funding. So lots of different components to our BEAD planning process, but I think the biggest and most important one to me is local coordination, and that's getting involved and making sure that we hear what each community needs and what the desires and plans for each community are. So at the end of our planning process, we'll have a 5-year action plan with all these components. We'll pass along the slides afterwards, so don't worry if you can't read all this very quick, but lots of important things in here. Understanding where we're at, having good data, have a strategy for coordinating locally, having a plan for building infrastructure, understanding how we're going to allocate our funding, what our grant program process will be like, and providing technical assistance. So all those big components involved in the BEAD program. And, just to recap on BEAD, it's really focused on infrastructure investment, but that's not enough. And Alyssa's going to talk to you about kind of the other component, which we see, integrated and sequenced in hand with our BEAD investments. But over the next 9 months or so, once we get our application approved by NTIA, we're going to be doing lots of these planning activities so that when we make our infrastructure investment, we are strategic and efficient and can leverage those dollars to connect as many Wisconsinites as we can in the next 5 years. So I'll pass it over now to Alyssa, who's going to be talking about the Digital Equity Act programs.
Thanks, Rory. Every time I hear it, it's exciting. So I just wanted to start with a quick kind of reframing, a reminder about what digital equity is, how it's divided. But digital equity is this condition where individuals and community have that information technology for full participation in society. And so I've seen a little infographic that says, like, the digital divide is the issue, digital equity is the goal, digital inclusion is how we get there. And so I like that. I think it's short and simple. And so those are those key elements. Those are digital inclusion activities. So affordable, robust broadband, internet-enabled devices that meet the needs of the users, digital literacy training access, quality tech support, and applications and online content that meets the needs of the people in Wisconsin for self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. And so that's really what we're talking about here and this is also part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. This is a separate program, but also with NTIA. Sorry, I'm driving and talking. And so I just want to, I think Rory said this really well, but when our office has been thinking about BEAD and digital equity planning, we think of these as either, you might think of them as siblings, or you might think of them as two chapters in the same book, but we see that these are really parallel and integrated plans. They're sequenced and they're connected. It's not, we take care of access over here and then do this equity stuff over there. They're together and they're integrated. So as people are getting access to the infrastructure, they're getting access to the supports to make use of the network, because we know when there's more users on the network, networks are stronger, they're more economically viable, they get a better return on investment. And so we always want to drive participation in the network, because more network users equals a stronger network. And so these are the program. There's some covered populations. For the state of Wisconsin will receive $950,000 for planning. Strangely, the planning period for this is 12 months instead of 9 months. So they're a little staggered with timing. Our planning application in the state has been submitted, and just like our BEAD planning application, we are waiting on approval from NTIA, or final review and approval from NTIA. But the planning application then draws down what's called the capacity dollars. And those capacity dollars, again, we're estimating, because it's going to be based on some data that's coming in the future, we're estimating the state would receive $25 million about over 5 years for the digital equity activities and to implement the plan. The Digital Equity Act has some very specific covered populations that are the target and need to be engaged and really participate in the planning. In the state of Wisconsin, 79% of the population fits into one of these groups. So while you might look at this list and think, oh, that's not so many people, it's almost everybody. It's basically 80%, 4 out of 5 people are in one of these groups in the state of Wisconsin. And so low income, aging, incarcerated, veterans, people with disabilities, people with language barriers, including people with low literacy, low English language literacy, racial and ethnic minorities, and rural inhabitants are the covered populations. And that's a lot of people in Wisconsin that we're hoping to really engage in this process. In addition to the state planning grant that I just talked about, there's also the state planning grant leads to state capacity grant. There's also a competitive grant. And one of the strategies that has been identified both by the task force and by our office is we're always looking to maximize and draw down as many federal dollars as we can to the state. And so in addition to the state capacity grant, we also want to position as many organizations, systems, and ideas that we have to compete federally and draw additional digital equity dollars to the state to encourage more people to access. Just like Rory shared, the plan has a lot of required components, including measurable outcomes, collaborations with key stakeholders, a stated vision for digital equity, a needs assessment, an inventory of existing best practices and programs and services in the state. And we're starting to undertake this work right now. Oh, there's a whole nother page of required report components in the report, but I won't read these all to you, but it's significant and substantial. But these two plans, the digital equity plan and the BEAD 5-year action plan, will be chapters in the same book. And I think our staff is happy and willing to take questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because people probably would rather see faces than this big questions.
Are there any questions for Alyssa or Rory? Very helpful presentation. And thank you for allowing us to just gaze at the list of reporting requirements rather than reading through them.
Chris, this is Angie. I have a question.
Go ahead, Angie.
I understand. I've been hearing from other states as well that folks are speculating that the BEAD funding might not be distributed until maybe even 2024. Wondering what the state's plans are, if there are any additional plans with capital projects monies or other state funding to do grant rounds in the interim.
Sure. So certainly we hope we don't have to wait till 2024 for BEAD funding. I think to be clear for members on the call, the BEAD funding is going to be determined based on those FCC maps we come out with. And we're really hopeful that in the next couple months, by next spring, NTIA will kind of make that call and start allocating that money. If that doesn't happen, we do have, like Angie mentioned, there are other funding sources, other funds we can use in the meantime to keep pumping and keep pushing our broadband expansion grants. Certainly, there is a little bit of state money left over. We were allocated $125 million of bond funding in our most recent biennial budget, but there is a little bit of return funding and some universal service funding that we can lean on. I don't have an exact number for you. It depends a little bit on sometimes grant projects come in under cost or things change, but that's an option for some additional funding. There's also these capital projects fund money. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about that because we're just waiting and hoping to hear from the federal government to get a real decision on that. But it's another, in general, it's just another federal funding source provided to us. The state has applied for it. We're waiting to hear back. And that'll be more money for broadband development and broadband participation. When we hear a word, we're hopeful to pass that along and start providing grants and having a conversation about another grant round sooner than later. So certainly BEAD is the big infrastructure investment, but there's other funding sources coming in, and we will hopefully continue to leverage those as soon and as often as we can. Thanks, Angie.
Thank you for that, Rory. Just a follow-up, and I understand if folks can't share, but as far as what was submitted by the state for the capital projects fund, was there an amount set aside specifically for infrastructure?
Yeah, so the amount is a little bit in flux right now because we just have not gotten an approval from the federal government. So we're still waiting for that final approval before we're going to announce any amounts or anything like that.
Just one more follow-up on that one. I think I've heard that one's 100 by 100 symmetrical requirement on the federal side. Is that the case?
Yeah, so infrastructure investments under the Capital Projects Fund, the focus that U.S. Department of Treasury, who's the administrating entity for that money, they focused in on that 100 by 100 symmetrical. I think there is an allowance in there for 100 by 20, but if 100 by 20 infrastructure is built, there's an expectation and a requirement that any investment would be in a technology that could be scaled in the near term to that 100 by 100 standard. So whereas BEAD has a 100 by 20 requirement, capital projects is a little bit more stringent, a little bit more ambitious in its speed standard.
Any other questions before we move on? All right. So moving on, the next item is really the work item for us. This is where we're going to start to discuss the focus of the task force over the next year. And I know that in advance of this meeting, we got a lot of feedback from the email that was sent out asking for suggestions and ideas. Jaren, are you going to lead this part of the discussion?
Sorry, Chris, if you just asked If you had just asked something, I mean, my internet just hiccuped there. I apologize
that's
about
okay.
that. So I think I missed what you may have said.
That's okay. I was watching your mute light stay on.
Yeah.
For the conversation around the focus of the task force, are we going to have somebody at the PSC office lead that discussion?
You know, I think we can do a little bit of a group effort here. I know Kristen has agreed to help facilitate some of these conversations, and I'd be happy to step in as well. I think, you know, kind of the large emphasis is kind of where we would like to focus these conversations for this next year of work. And I asked task force members to respond to a prompt, you know, largely again, asking where do we want to focus these efforts. I appreciate everyone who did respond to that. And then I also took a moment to kind of aggregate and compile and group some of those responses that we got, because as you can imagine, they kind of ended up fitting into some larger buckets. So I have the document that I put together. I can pull that up and we can kind of walk through it. Kristen, if that makes sense to you.
I do have it pulled up and I'm ready to walk through it, actually. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Would you like me to share my screen, or would you like?
I can share my screen if that's all right.
Sure.
Right. Thank you very much, Jaron. And thank you for sending that out ahead of I got that a little bit earlier today and was able to take a good look at it. So for those of you that are returning from last year, you'll know that often, or you'll remember that often when we went into our discussions, we broke off into small groups, went into separate rooms with a facilitator, and we took notes on Google. We'll probably be doing that again next month or the month after, but today we really wanted to keep the group together as one whole unit, since it's our first meeting together and we're really talking about the focus of our work over the course of this next 7, 8, 9 months. So with that, I'll share the Word document that includes the information. And after we take a quick look at that, we'll move into a PowerPoint that is on my computer, not on Google Drive like we normally look at. And we can go through each one of the categories that Jaron identified point by point. We'll just have an open discussion during this time, so feel free to unmute your mic and talk as you feel you have something to share or you would like to join in. You can raise your hand or drop items in the chat as well. We're going to keep this next 30 to 40 minutes really casual and free flowing, so we all have a chance to speak. So with that, I will share my screen now. As I was telling Jaron earlier today, I'm working on a new computer. So far it seems to be going well, but if there's a hiccup, it is one of two reasons. Either the internet connection is going away quickly, or it is my new computer doing interesting things, but bear with me if that should happen. So what you should be seeing, you might be seeing, which screen am I sharing? Are you seeing my cursor moving around a Word document?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right. First hurdle overcome with the new computer. So here we have a summary of the categories that Jaron identified from the feedback you gave earlier today. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories total that are identified as things we might want to work on. I'll have you look this over. While you're looking this over, and we'll see these each individually, I want to just review some of the things that we heard today from our different speakers. So Chair Bulk started out at the beginning of the day, and to paraphrase what she said is some of the things she's hoping that we'll pay attention to or focus on over the course of the next many months is planning and coordination of funds. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. You might have this more accurately than I do, and we'll send this out later on this week, most likely in notes. Second, a deeper dive into affordability. Third, increasing competition in rural areas. And fourth, additional ways to incentivize network expansion or broadband expansion aside from grants. So those are 4 of the big items that she added to us or asked us to think about as we're going forward. If there are more than that, please drop them in the chat or feel free to add as you see necessary. Rory took us through some really important information, and the things that stood out to me, and Rory, you'll probably have items that you want to add to this, is that availability is one concern at the national level, and defining availability in this instance, among other things, as service within 10 days of calling, and that good maps are important, which certainly resonated with me and probably many of the folks from last year's task force, as we identified, we've had continually identified maps as being essential to the work that we do, and accurate maps being essential. Alyssa talked about digital equity and inclusion. And I think the phrase that I'm gonna like write this on a Post-it, because I think it's great that access and equity are siblings, and they work together, and we'll be looking to move them forward together, hand in hand, in a coordinated way, as one without the other is not an optimal way of addressing. She talked about BEAD, the broadband equity, access, and deployment, and some of the grant opportunities that are sequenced coming down the road. So that's just a review of what we've heard already today. It was a lot of great information, very surface review of what we've said. Now, looking at these items, I'm going to switch over to a PowerPoint presentation here. So I'll stop my screen share for a moment. While I'm doing that, does anybody have anything they'd like to share, anything that they remember from today's presentation that they recall that I might have glossed over? Oh, and I see Brittany, I now you see asking me to make the document larger, and I did not see that until this moment. So let's pull up the larger PowerPoint. All right, and now are you seeing a PowerPoint that's not quite in presentation mode?
Yes.
All right, is it large enough?
It is good
to see. Can everyone see it? All right.
Looks great.
Awesome. Move my chat over here. Fantastic. So our first item here is federal funds via the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These are organized according to the items or the categories that had the most suggestions over the information that Jaren collected. So not necessarily in order of importance, but in order of more or less popularity or number of suggestions. So let's take these each point by point, and let's settle on, for this moment, federal funds by the Job Infrastructure Investment Act. What is your reaction to this topic? Do we have anything we want to add to this? Anything that we want to highlight as more important or critical?
So Kristen, this is Chris Meyer. I think that last bullet point is really important. How do we manage the influx of money, both at a time when we have inflationary pressures, but also when that money comes in? That's going to create a lot of work for a lot of contractors that likely the money will exceed the amount of contractors we have to do the work, which could drive up costs. So I think that's a really important point for us to focus on, is how to make sure we're getting the best value for the dollars we're getting.
Thank you, Chris.
Kristen, just a comment. I spend a lot of time with individual counties doing broadband plans, and one of the things that often is perhaps overlooked at the state level, but very important at the local level, is the 911 communications network and access to fiber optic facilities and some of the local government issues. And so just something that we've been doing that has been very helpful is creating a county-wide comprehensive plan for communications as to how you're going to proceed with each of these functions. And it sort of pulls together the different groups, from the towns associations to the counties. And again, I'm in strictly the rural setting on this, so it may not work in metro areas, but certainly in rural areas. And so I don't know if that is contemplated in any of this, but I think it is an important piece to make sure that no area gets left behind.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. That's a great point. And just one thing to note, I am writing down notes on paper, and we're going to be adding your comments to the final file for this. So they won't go up on the PowerPoint now, but we're going to capture information like what you just shared, Steve, and what you shared and shared out with the group. So thank you. The 911 system, very critical importance, and the countywide comprehensive plan for communication. Other comments that we might have, things to add to this?
I guess just one thing I would note is that I think the difference in this funding, given its nature and size, is that ultimately the federal government wants this to quote unquote, kind of fix the rural divide and push us to that next level. And they see this as the item that will get us there. And so I think probably the shift compared to past rounds of broadband grants is, I think we're always making headway towards a better situation on this side, but really this funding at its core is to try and make it whole. And so I think that's a slightly different nature than what we've done in the past related to successive rounds of broadband funding. And so I think in the past it was kind of what could make it better, that's worth funding. In this situation, it's almost a different question of how do we make this funding to get the entire state to a certain level, because there probably isn't going to be large dollar amounts available after this round. But
that's a really important framing perspective. These are significant amounts of money. And
I think along those lines, as I look at the list and how do we best braid the IJA funds with other fundings, I think it kind of gets to the point that we've been, struggling with all along is how do we get all the state and federal dollars and work with those together, but even know what they all are. And it gets to Chair Vaugh's comment today about what are those additional ways beyond those grants. And I think taking a look at how we do some of those other funding that we've just kind of touched around the borders with philanthropy and some of the other funding mechanisms that are out there. I think we need to really take a look at how that fits in with these dollars, so we're making the best use of them.
It's a great point, Gail. Other comments?
Just to take off on what Gail said, in some cases, there's already funding that's there that can be reappropriated. And an example of that would be, Brown County had $10 million set aside for 911 connectivity, and they're going to reappropriate that to broadband as part of it. So Oconto County similar. So sometimes the local governments have dollars set aside that can be integrated into a larger fiber optic network project.
And recalling from writing last year's report, noting those instances and examples of communities that have done important work in integrating or reappropriating might be something that is good for us to keep track of, and perhaps reach out to some of those communities so we can record what they're doing and have it jump on our case studies for the final report.
I think part of that, if you it came out after our report was written, but the Government Accountability Organization had put forth a paper talking about all the different agencies and organizations that have funding that are touched by broadband. And it was like 15 different departments and 113 or more, programs. And I think that kind of, if that's what there is at that level, I can only imagine, Wisconsin's probably similar. It seems like every time we turn around, we've heard about emergency planning and funding there and healthcare. And so there's little bits and dibbles and dabbles everywhere that we need to start looking at how we can leverage those and put those into a new way of delivering services.
Excellent point, Gail. I'm wondering if we should capture that link and include it in our files. So we have that as a reference. That was a very good paper. Very interesting paper. Other comments on federal funds and infrastructure? I think this is one of the more exciting, these developments, for me at least, are among the more exciting developments. The support that this can be perceived as giving us.
So Kristen, Michelle with Microsoft. I will put in the chat, our Airband team came out with a digital equity playbook, And it has a timeline in there for like the next 6 years and all this funding that may just give everybody a snapshot view of what's ahead. And then it also has some things to think about as we're deciding like how to apply, what does it mean to apply for some of these grants.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Other comments and things to share? Or should we move on to the next?
Actually, Kristen, if I could just briefly mention, I had this thought and I wanted to mention it from the top, but some of the conversation sparked my thoughts was that as we're kind of walking through this, I would encourage folks if they're, we've got monthly meetings scheduled till next June. So if there's any, if any of this conversation kind of sparks ideas as to presenters that might be able to come in or folks that we can, call upon to come share some of their knowledge with us, that would be great to take note of as well. And I'm taking some notes here. So if there's any ideas for presenters along the way, please do mention that. And I know we can work to work on that. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaron. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. All right, let's go on to the next one. Affordability, digital equity, and adoption. And we had 4 items that were suggested, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we've sparked through conversation and through listening to the presentations today. So what reactions, comments, ideas, suggestions, things you'd like to share?
I think that affordability and the sources of financing are integrally tied together, and that we perhaps ought to spend more time on that. Our 30-year bond program gets criticized pretty heavily, but the counties that are doing it understand that the reason it's being done is for affordability. If your return on capital is 7 years or 10 years, that's a lot different pricing than if your return on capital is 30 years. And so the access to long-term funding, which the state and the counties and the municipalities are uniquely positioned to provide, is really a strong mechanism to drive down rates. Because I think in that second question, how do providers set rates? It's really return on capital. And so what is that capital costing and in what period of time does it need to be returned is really the critical question in number 2. So I think beyond these questions, the question has to be made, how can we access long-term low-cost capital for providers?
Thanks, Steve. Great point. Great point.
Kristen, this is Chris Meyer. When I was reviewing these, one of the things that jumped out about this particular group of items is that there may be a regional component to these, where all the other ones tend to be kind of a statewide approach. There's probably going to be a different approach in Mercer from Madison on how you approach affordability or digital equity and adoption. And so as we work on this one, it may be good to think about that from a regional standpoint.
Yeah, I'll add on to your regional comment, Chris, because when I look at digital literacy and skills, I think there is, or even affordability and devices, there are some really good things going on in our state that we may be able to learn from, but also then expand, Goodwill Industries and what they're doing with digital literacy right now in the Fox cities. I was just talking to the western part of the state that said if our Goodwill Industries could do that, it would be great. So how do we also think about, as a state, we support certain programs in strengthening those right out of the gate, along with, some other grants on that maybe could be done more regionally.
When I look at the affordability, the top one, the continued outreach of ACP, I guess it came to mind just one study that I was looking at just this week was Alabama had done some work in this area And ACP and Lifeline, and ACP is one program. There's Lifeline and others that are out there that we need to have a handle on that. But Alabama was looking at how those programs are promoted. And most of those, all of the programs for broadband right now are promoted through ISPs. And Alabama took an approach of doing it through the provider, the same as they do SNAP and some of the others, and looking at what that does for affordability and competition. So that might be something that's a larger, issue to take a look at affordability that could impact policy, and maybe just looking at a few of those other programs, which could also take a look at affordability. It's not always just the low income. I think of Chris's comment about inflation and what's happening and people's struggles and how they're paying for those services. And we can have the services, but people have to be able to afford them. And it's not just necessarily low cost. So figuring out how to work with to lower those costs through competition or however, but create that atmosphere where we have good service, but it's affordable for everyone to utilize to the best of their ability.
Thank you, Gail. I'm going to note that Alabama paper too. I wonder if we can have a file or can start a file of deep dives for those that are interested in a little extra reading, that can pick up some of these really great resources that have started to surface over the past years as other communities and other states are addressing the same issues that we're addressing. There has been, I feel like over the last couple of years, some really good research that has come out and some excellent case studies and communities sharing what they're doing. Other thoughts on affordability and digital equity and adoption?
One thing not mentioned here that I think is very important is construction costs, because you get one shot at the cost of putting the fiber in and connecting it. And if that can be done efficiently, it affects the affordability for the life of the asset. And so there are wild swings in the cost per mile of deployment. And I think that that's something that perhaps needs to be evaluated in the selection process. The other thing I noticed missing here is the commissioner mentioned competition. And I think that encouraging competition, be that in rural areas or be that in metro areas, and I'm going to step out of my comfort zone for a second, but I've got some friends on the north side of Milwaukee, and they experience the same issues as we experience in rural America in terms of lack of education on digital literacy and lack of affordability, and in some cases lack of access as well, particularly in certain urban areas. And it shocked me in the past when communities in Milwaukee reached out to us, because we're just not a metro provider, but the stories that they share are concerning, that within the major cities we have gaps in broadband, and probably even more so gaps in digital literacy.
Thank you, Steve. That's a really important point. And I see Dave Burka from United Way raised his hand.
Hi, thank you. I would just like to echo Steve's comments and affirm that, that has definitely been our experience in Metro Milwaukee as we try and get folks registered for ACP, and also just dive into what is preventing people from really accessing broadband in areas where we would, define the environment as infrastructure rich. And so it's affordability, but there's a literacy component. Folks don't know about ACP in cases where they would be eligible. Oftentimes they don't have the access or the tools to even register for ACP. And just ACP as one example of a variety of programs or resources that could help them. The process for registering for a program like that actually can be quite confusing or cumbersome, which in and of itself might prevent people from adopting the benefit. So we're trying to come up with efficient ways around those barriers for folks, but it is a real challenge.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Other comments on affordability, digital equity and adoption? Or we can move on to mapping and data. Marta.
Yeah, I mean, having been in groups that talked about this over the last couple of years, I just would like to see us be really mindful of sort of the through line from the first report to the second report to the third report. What have we learned along the way? How are we looking at these? We've talked a lot about these issues before. We've come up with some really good ideas. The question in my mind, are we seeing traction? I love to hear what I'd love to get to know David more and learn about what he's learning through the United Way. You know, we talked a lot about working with non-governmental organizations and how they could help, and nonprofits. Is that work being successful? What are they really seeing? Where have all of our great ideas gone in the past? You know, I'm really interested in making sure that we're following this all the way through.
And Marta, I'm tempted to go to 7. This might be a good transition. Maybe we'll jump around instead of go in order.
Oh, there it is at the
Tracking
bottom.
Goals from
Okay.
previous report.
Sorry.
No, I think maybe this is probably, I feel like this is a natural segue and we don't have to go in order of numbers. Natural segue to maybe talk about that. This is our 3rd year. This will be our 3rd report. A lot has happened since the first year in terms of what the group has accomplished, in terms of what the state has done, in terms of now what the federal government is doing to assist us. I always hate to inject emotion into a meeting, but I feel a great deal of hopefulness with everything that's coming down the road and the things that the group has thought about over the past couple of years. Let's talk about tracking goals for a few minutes and how we might want to do that, what we might want to focus on.
You know, just sort of following through on my thought before we go there, I'm just thinking about, you know, the presentation that came before this from the PSC about how mapping and data has changed since we started with this group, even, you know, the way we're looking at it and the way we're identifying those pinpoints and all of those things. There's clearly been an evolution, right? And so I think it's absolutely fair, and it's non-critical of what we've done, but you know, the transition from then to now is really important in every area, not just affordability and equity and adoption, but also in mapping and tech support and workforce development training. Even our needs for broadband have changed so much since the day the first broadband task force was organized to now working in a mostly hybrid world. So yeah, sorry, I'm just making commentary more than anything. I don't know if I'm being helpful.
That's the whole goal of today. Is to talk about these things and to comment and help us focus for the next few months. What other ideas do we have around tracking goals?
This is Brittany. To the earlier point that it seems like there's a shift in how the grants are being approached, which was, you know, kind of strategic grant making to potentially closing a gap. I wonder if that's certainly something that needs to be tied back to some of the earlier goals. I remember that we set up speed goals, and certainly we're going to see some of that, especially with the 100 megabits, 20 bits down and up. So certainly making sure that we're figuring out how to articulate the gaps in a different way. The maps are great. Maybe move the statewide ones are really great. I wonder if there's a way to kind of figure out a more regional approach sometimes to kind of narrow in and strategically work in certain areas that have harder areas to, you know, do the construction of the new routes or have to have very specific technical assistance on the ground to make sure that the community is talking to the potential providers. I think that might be something to also think about in that toggling between the state level and the targeted closing of the gap.
And thank you for bringing that up, Brittany. We did talk a lot in last year's report about the need for networks, not necessarily the physical, solely the physical network of the broadband itself, but the networks within communities that need to develop in order to foster the type of environment that will allow for broadband to expand the way that we need it to expand. Other ideas on tracking goals from previous reports?
Yeah, this is Lori Collins. I think we need to focus on at least a couple of things here. One is what goals are important for tracking, but also how we're going to track them. And how do we make sure that we're getting all the information from around the state and all the various programs that might be addressing the needs that we've addressed in our previous reports. We want to make sure that we know who, what groups, what organizations, what companies, what policies are being changed based on our recommendations. So I want to make sure that we identify how we're going to track all of that information.
Something that might help in the tracking as part of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, there is a digital equity scorecard that shows each state. So how are we, Microsoft actually helped create the scorecard. So if we need to talk to the person that created it, we could possibly do so, or even have a conversation with NDIA, because I think ultimately, how do we as a state move this scorecard might be critical. I'll put the link in the chat.
That'd be great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Lori. All great points. Great points. All right, I'm looking at the time. Should we go back up to mapping and tackle mapping and data? We had 4 points, and mapping was something that we discussed quite a bit in last year's report, and I believe the first report covered it fairly well as well. Chris, I am thinking back to, you said from Mercer to Madison. So I've got this framing in my mind now. How do our suggestions, how do our points that we'll be making, play in Mercer versus Madison versus Marshfield versus Milwaukee? We could cover the state and named communities. What are our thoughts on mapping and data?
This is Chris. I really liked what Rory mentioned in his presentation about some of the speed testing and what I would call crowdsourcing data for speed tests and getting actual experiential experience. I know that can be challenging because different ISPs in the same area, you're not sure which ISP they're using, but I think there's a lot we can do in the area of mapping and data. And I think it's as critical as any of the other areas, because it's really, it's the tool we most commonly use to make decisions about whether a person is eligible for a program or not. And quite honestly, it's a lot of guessing based on just experience in different geographic areas. So I do think this is a top priority in my book. And I do really like the idea of dynamic mapping or getting some sort of data source in place that allows maps to be far more accurate more quickly.
Angie.
Thank you, Kristen. One of the things the state is going to have to address in the BEAD program will be identifying the extremely high cost areas. And I think this is an area where the task force can definitely have some input and likely bring in folks who can enlighten the task force on really where those areas may be, or how we can best help the office in advising them on setting those guidelines.
That's a great point, Angie. Thank you very much. Yeah. Other comments on mapping and data?
One of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of the following up on some of the mapping software, like the geomapping software we saw last year, and how they can be used to target resources. How can it also be tied directly to planning, community planning, and the different needs around the state that are so varied?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. That connects us right back to our idea that that network formation at the local level is really what builds the foundation towards a statewide accessible and available and affordable network.
And I know one of the arguments that we sometimes hear from providers is people, when we do the crowdsourcing mapping, it's the people who are taking the test. It's what they have signed up for, the level of internet that they've signed up for. But I think one of the things we've learned through the mapping and through the geo software is it can sometimes, by comparing those maps with the crowdsourcing data with pockets where we're seeing it's available from the providers, but people are saying they don't have it. Maybe that also helps us identify those affordability issues. So we can tie those to the mapping to the affordability. It might be available as an access point at those higher speeds, but not necessarily affordable to the folks who are living in that area. So I think mapping is really important. It can tell us what's there, but I think if we delve a little deeper, it can also get at some of the other issues that are there.
That's a great point, Gail. It's not just what's there, it's what's available and what are people actually paying for. Other comments?
One comment just to kind of pull a couple of the pieces together as well. So I think in past reports, we were looking for the tools because they weren't available. I guess the one thing I would say is that there is more and more of the tools available. So similar for the affordability, we now have ACP. So maybe it shifts from what tool is available to how do we maximize ACP, through providers, through education. Ultimately additional adoption actually drives down the cost of broadband because you have higher penetration in those areas. On the mapping side of things, I think the tool, the one that we've got to deal with from the FCC is related to this new, broadband data collection side of things. So, challenging the fabric, we kind of have to work with the tool they have on that side. Not that the other tools from the crowdsourcing and other things won't inform some of those decisions, but putting the effort into the tool provided by the FCC is ultimately going to generate the dollars that we get at a statewide level. So I think we're kind of in a shift in the sense that I think before we were looking for the tools, we're on the cusp of getting some of the cool tools. We may find that some of the tools don't fit perfectly, but in the same sense, we're not maximizing the value of the federally designed tools. We are going to leave money on the table that we're going to have to spend at the state level.
That's a great point, Justin. A great point. All right, I'm looking at keeping an eye on the time. We've got a couple more slides. A lot of these topics we're going to come back. Oh, Angie, go ahead. All right, we'll move on because some of these topics are going to come back around and we'll have probably large blocks of time to talk about some of these in depth. Getting to those areas and communities of need was also something that we had quite a few suggestions around. What do we have to offer and share around this idea, this topic, this category? Or maybe what would we like to highlight around this category?
I'll raise my hand again. I think in these areas of the state, again, we're going to likely come back to how the state defines the extremely high cost areas. And somebody correct me if I'm misremembering these things, but the extremely high cost areas won't necessarily have the same type of infrastructure requirements associated with them. And I think it'll be important to get local input as we identify what those areas are and make sure that it's meeting the needs of those rural communities.
Thank you,
If I can play off what Angie had stated, I think this comes to kind of that place-based programming, and how do our communities, we're going to hear a lot of place-based approaches coming out nationally. And we're hearing a lot of burnout from communities as far as applying for grants, and, you know, putting a grant writer isn't always the answer. They just don't have the staff or the people to do so, and then the commitments to the administration and the follow-up. So making sure that we keep things easy for these communities. And I heard some of that yesterday at the WEDC event. And one thing I thought of, is there a way that we can showcase things that are happening in other communities or across Wisconsin? So for example, a lot of communities have a library. What are other libraries doing that they should think about? Or, you know, even is there a template of a grant that we could say, if you submit it this way and commit to doing that, here's the resources you will leverage, and make it simpler.
Michelle, I'm going to tack on to what you said and what Angie said. This is Barbara from New North. So in last year's task force report, there was something, a recommendation of a playbook or a how-to guide to assist communities with those types of best practices. And it said to work across Wisconsin. I would ask whether or not we should look beyond Wisconsin as well and look at other states and see what other models they have. I really like your idea of templates, Michelle. And then to take it one step further is not just only the grant applications, the how to, but then to also take it one step further on how to then implement those grant dollars, because the idea of federal dollars is we want those federal dollars spent as soon as possible. So then taking those stories, not just from Wisconsin, from other parts of the United States, and building that playbook from start to finish, right? From grant dollars to actual implementation, and then all those steps in between.
Templates and toolboxes. These are great suggestions. These are great points. Let's move on. Let's remember some of these ideas and bring them back to future meetings. Let's move on to technical support and some of the time that we have left. So technical support, we did talk a lot about technical assistance in the report last year. We had a lot of discussion around technical assistance, and as I'm listening to some of the comments today, it seems like we're leading to some of those ideas as well. What are our thoughts on technical assistance and things maybe we want to highlight or think about?
Just bringing up a concept that we worked with, probably with both of the previous cycles, is that there's different conditions of readiness all over the state. And so do we have a strategy for supporting the communities that need to learn about the problem and position it? Do we have a strategy for assisting some of the areas that have a couple of larger projects in motion, but really do need a little more guidance on dealing with these larger grant processes and the oversight? And then, you know, the third tier is that really strategic work, you know, kind of like Steve's comment about Northern Milwaukee. Is there a strategy and technical support that can work with that part of that larger urban area that just has very specific areas of need? And it's, you know, we talk about it not being one size fits all, but I think we can strategically put these groups into categories so that we can work efficiently over the next 5 years, that we're able to tap into BEAD.
And I think your point over the next 5 years, the technical assistance, we're not going to accomplish that all in the first year, the second year, especially when you take a look at those tiers that we've looked at through the PSC and WEDC's, you know, pilot project. We've got those that are just starting out. I've got more and more communities that never thought they needed to do planning, that are all like, oh, where do we start? And, you know, Dr. Baker, I work with Dr. Baker in Milwaukee this week, and they're working on how do we get started. And it's not going to be a process that we finish in the next 6 weeks to 6 months. They're just getting started and trying to figure out how they pull that all together. So it's how do we support those communities where they're at, those regions where they're at, because I think there's great opportunity to bring those. But we can't forget in the technical support how we're really going to target those tribal communities and those other communities of marginal communities that we're not getting a lot of direct attention to. We mentioned tribal in our last report, but without really a specific plan. So I think we really need to concentrate on some of that as well.
Gail, as you said that, I was just on a call with another state today, and they too were talking about tribal, and they made the comment that like the tribes are very afraid of. So, how do you demystify some, as far as if we give digital literacy skills to our tribal members, will they leave? Versus how do we keep them here? So some of it could just be that knowledge and some of that knowing on how to keep them in your community.
And it's that building trust, just even within their own organization, and how do they partner? Broadband doesn't stop at the tribal lands boundary. It goes into the next county, and they're part of a county, and how do they work together, and developing that trust with other municipalities, vendors, agencies. That takes time. That's a bigger issue than just the broadband itself. You can't get to broadband until you develop those relationships and partnerships. And part of that is that facilitation and those technical skills, someone to help bring that together.
They're great points. Great points. Let's look at workforce development and training. We've touched on this in a couple of different slides previously, so maybe there are some direct thoughts, some ideas, some things we want to highlight with workforce development and training.
I have a feeling that this is one of those instances where there's other state agencies that could be brought to the table to have a really good conversation about some of the solutions. And there are a lot of examples flowing from other states about how they're really getting out in front of this, that it might be interesting to take a real great look at some of the solutions. And for me, I just keep thinking about the need to be talking to all of the providers about their needs and really trying to take this as a moment of opportunity in some of those communities that are disenfranchised, and give them the capacity to potentially have these very good paying jobs that are right there and are great need right now. So I think there needs to be some real thought put behind this part of what we're going to be seeing.
Angie.
Yeah, Brittany, I'll follow up with or add on to that. It'd be an opportunity. I know Jaron was asking about future speakers, an opportunity to bring in the folks from WSTA and the Cable Association and others, and have a good discussion there about the programs they have in place, and get their ideas about how we could move forward. And I'm jumping back, Gail, to your point around tribal. I understand Theron Retnia is with NTIA now, and he is working with tribes across the country right now, and he'd be another good person to bring into a future task force meeting.
Just to add on to that as well, I think it's worthy to highlight the Northwood Technical College program that exists, and it's one of the more advanced ones in the country here in Wisconsin, and it is utilized by other states, and perhaps there's something that we could do to further promote that program, or leverage that for workforce development.
Thank you, Chad. Alyssa.
I just wanted to share the bit of information that Wisconsin has the highest percentage of our tribes that have received tribal connectivity funds in the country right now. And so I know there's some it's not the most money, but it's of the number of tribes we have more of them that have drawn those funds than any other state right now. And so I know that there's still some significant need, but I just wanted to make sure that people knew there was 4 of the 11 tribes have received grants already, large federal grants.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's great. Lori.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we're looking into the youth apprenticeship program that is available in the state, working with the high schools in the area and students who may be interested in learning networking and installation of the facilities and so forth. I think it's a great way, especially in an area like ours, which is very small, to keep those kids home after they graduate high school with a really well-paying job, and they come in ready, really well trained and ready to go. I know one of our goals is keeping more and more of our facilities construction in-house as opposed to hiring contract work. And so that's going to be important as we move forward. So that's another one I'll throw out there.
Thank you very much, Lori. That's fantastic. This has been a great discussion. This has been wonderful. We're going to capture the notes that you've shared, the links that everybody shared, the ideas, and include them in probably our report out before next month. I am looking at our time and I'm thinking we have 2 more items are on our agenda, next steps and then adjournment. So I'll conclude the discussion for now. But if you have ideas, keep coming, email, send them, bring them to the next meeting. With that, back to you, Chris or Jared.
Thanks, Kristen. Well, let's move back to our agenda. Thanks for the discussion. I think, it's tough to pick what areas to focus on because I think all of these bring a lot of unique challenges and really barriers to different folks that each of us serve. That takes us to item number 7 on the agenda, which is next steps. Jaron, do you have some next steps for us?
Sure. This is just typically, this is kind of a placeholder agenda. I'd just like to remind folks of our next meeting date, which is October 19th. You can stay tuned for an agenda. That'll be posted publicly once it's available, but I just kind of wanted to remind folks of our meeting cadence that we've got going now. So the schedule is such that we'll be meeting every 3rd Wednesday of each month. So that would put us on track for October 19th next month. So just wanted to make sure that that's on people's radar. And if you, every member of the task force should have already gotten the calendar invite, but if you didn't, or if you need me to send it again, please do let me know, and Steve, I will get you added. So that's really all I wanted to cover with next steps.
Awesome. And, I know if most people are like me, your brain gets overwhelmed in these meetings, and as soon as you hang up, you think of like 4 things you wish you would have said. You can send those via email to Jaron or anyone at the PSC, so we can include those in the next meeting discussions as well, because I'm sure I'll have a couple that come up in the next hour or 2. Anything else we want to discuss today before we adjourn and give you back a few minutes of your afternoon? All right. Well, then, as Jared said, the next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 19th of October at 1 o'clock, same place, Hollywood Squares for everyone. Thank you for making my first meeting as chair easy, and hopefully we'll get through the next year together and make some big improvements to broadband across the state. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.